Good afternoon, everyone. My name's John Martell. I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan. It is my distinct privilege to introduce our next panel, The Future of the Front Office. Starting left to right, we have Daryl Morey, GM of the Rockets.
Yeah! We do not need a... Now we have to applaud everyone.
No. Jeff Luno, of the General Manager of the Houston Astros.
Is that right?
Nick Caserio, Director of Player Personnel for the New England Patriots.
Woo!
Bob Myers, Golden State Warriors GM. And our panel today will be moderated by Jackie McMullen, writer for ESPN.
All right.
The format of today's panel will be 45 minutes of discussion, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. If you'd like to submit a question, please use the hashtag #FrontOffice, and I'll give those to Jackie. And with that, I'll turn it over to her to give the panel.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for hanging in here, the final panel of the day. So I think we're really, really fortunate today to have four people who have really taken the front office position and looked outside the box, or as Daryl said in Bob's case, has taken the box and crushed it to pieces. So what I'd like to hear from each of you today is a little bit of where that innovation came from, how you went about it. And we'll start with you, Bob, because you're you got the hardware, you got the rings.
Okay.
And so when you took over as general manager of the Golden State Warriors, maybe you should share a little bit of your background first, because I'm not sure everybody knows from where you came.
Yeah.
And it's an unusual background, actually. So.
Used to be an agent, sports agent with Arn Tellem, he didn't do a panel this year, did he?
No, he bailed.
Well, I bailed.
He and Billy Bean are on vacation.
You know Arn,
yeah.
right? Yeah, you've known Arn a long time.
Yes, I have.
So it was a little unorthodox because I didn't have the pedigree of coming up as a scout or someone that had been in a front office for a while, but I did feel blessed and fortunate to, and I do have worked under somebody with his intellect, relationships, work ethic, that really taught me the business of sports from a variety of levels. Because what I tell people, as a general manager, we may negotiate 2 or 3 deals in an off season or 1 or 2 trades. When you're an agent and you're representing 40, 50 players in an office, you're dealing with 15 potential trade scenarios. You're signing 15 free agent contracts in the off season. So your experience grows exponentially. And so I was fortunate enough to be put in that position. And then Danny Ainge, the brilliant GM of the Celtics, gave me an opportunity to meet Joe Lacob, who was the new owner of the Warriors.
Right.
And so I through Danny's recommendation, walked into Joe's office and said, I grew up in the Bay Area, was a long-suffering Warriors fan, and I said, if there's a way for me to ever work for you in any capacity that you see fit, let me know. And I left his office thinking there's no chance. He gave me no indication.
That's pretty vague, seriously.
Well, I liked being an agent, but I didn't know how I could actually help a team. I knew I had negotiated quite a bit. I'm an attorney. But I didn't exactly I wasn't brazen enough to say, hire me, I'll help the Warriors do whatever. But I felt like I could help just by being around players and understanding the negotiating side of things. And then he took a chance on me and hired me as an assistant GM in 2011 and then promoted me a year later. So, I mean, I think everybody's got their own story, but for me, I'm surprised he hired me, and I'm not being humble. If I was him, I wouldn't have hired me, because he bought the team for what was a record number.
Well, he really messed up, didn't he?
I think it was a gamble because he bought the team for a lot of money, and it's a coveted job. And the Warriors have not been traditionally a successful team, but it's a great market. And I think people in our industry, at least in the NBA, know that if done well, it could be a place where you could really succeed. So I was surprised, and fortunately, we've done with Steve Kerr and all the people I get to work with have done well. So I don't even know what your question was.
Well, let me ask you this, though. This brings me to a new question. As an agent, and I imagine this has happened, we talk a lot about analytics. That's what we've been talking about here for the last couple of days. It seems to me it would behoove the agents to understand analytics themselves when presenting their clients as free agents. Was that something that you were versed in then?
Well, and I think Arn initially, and Jeff can add to this, baseball arbitration is probably the best use of analytics because it's direct,
so
cut and dry correlation. And I used to watch the baseball agents prepare for an arbitration. And I'm telling you, it is intense because everything's on the line. And so Arn would try to mimic that in NBA negotiations, even though the correlation isn't nearly as direct. You can hand a GM a 10-page stack of documents and they can just throw it in the trash analytically. Because if they don't agree with what you agree with, numbers don't mean anything.
Right, you have to know your audience.
Exactly,
yeah.
And so, but what is interesting is I have had agents, when we signed Andre Iguodala, there's some things that do jump out. And you can manipulate numbers to show your client in the most favorable way.
Right.
Clearly, you can remove a certain category where they're weak in, and then highlight ones where they're strong in, and to get a composite that isn't really accurate. But with Andre, there's certain things that are. You take guys like Andre Iguodala and Andrew Bogut, you cannot hide the fact that the teams that they are on are consistently ranked in the top 5, top 10 defensively.
Defensively, yep.
That's a real statistic that matters. If you're trying to get better defensively, our organization for years underperformed defensively. So it was an emphasis of ours. We have to get better defensively. How can we do that? Trade for Bogut, add Iguodala. And if you put two players that have had success defensively on team together, well, then what you get is hopefully what we had, we took a little slip defensively. Defensive efficiency goes way up. So yes, agents can add information, and it's getting more nuanced. It's getting more specific, because everybody's getting better at what they do. Agents are getting better at what they do. I think hopefully we are getting better at what we do as GMs. But it is fascinating from that viewpoint.
Nick, go for it.
It's actually an interesting topic in terms of perspective from an agent. We're dealing with the whole free agency period right now in the NFL.
Yes.
So, like you're talking about, an agent's always going to make an argument on the client's behalf, and you can have a number of statistics and metrics that say, okay, this player relative to this player. But free agency is about what a team is essentially willing to pay, a player. And you essentially, organizationally, you're going to assign a value to the player, what you think his value is relative to what his role is going to be on your team. And there might be some friendly disagreement amongst the agent from his perspective, but the reality is you're trying to fit that player within the context of your own individual team relative to his role. And then you have to be conscious of, okay, when you bring a new player in, especially in free agency, relative to other players on their team, maybe they have a similar role relative to their salary. So you're balancing off a number of different measures and metrics, but like you said, you can paint a picture as good as you want in terms of how good of a player is or isn't, relative to another player. But essentially, for agency, it's market driven, and I would say in free agency this year a little bit, there's been a supply and demand element where there's low supply, high demand, so some of the contracts get moved accordingly. So as a team, you have to have a discipline, stick to your discipline, and if there's an opportunity to take advantage of a market dislocation, then you go ahead and do it.
Yeah, and I think we can all agree that the Patriots have probably done that as well as anything. RTI, right? Return on investment. It seems to me you guys have done as well as anyone in the NFL, having lived through it with these players, trading Seymour just as he's starting to go, trading Mike Vrabel, which I know hurt everybody, as he's just about to go, Logan Mankins. For the fans and people in this area, those were very emotional decisions because those players could still play. But I'm assuming from you guys, you have metrics that say to you, we know what's happening and it's heading south here.
And look, those are difficult decisions to make. And I think when you're faced as a team, part of being in this business is making difficult decisions. You have to make tough decisions, and sometimes they're really difficult decisions, but in the long run, you're doing it in the best interest of the team. So if you're able to move a player or get something in return for the player, so you're measuring the short-term ramifications maybe versus the long-term, and it's a fine line, really, in terms of how you put it all together.
Because you have to worry about team chemistry, too, and how they react. I mean, the famous one we always laugh about is Lawyer Malloy. You guys made a decision to release him. The Patriots, for those of you who don't know, go get completely croaked by Buffalo, and everybody's saying, the Patriots blew this is the worst thing, and then they went on to win the Super Bowl. So what do we know, as usual? So.
Well, I mean, those things happen, and I would say that week was just being around the team. That was a difficult week for everybody, but, Bill and the staff were able to put everything back together. I mean, Scott, who's here, I think, was a part of that. I mean, those are difficult things, but you have to weather the storm and move forward. And then in our game, in our league, it's really a week-to-week endeavor. We have one opportunity a week to go out there and play and perform well, and that's what we're trying to optimize.
So, Jeff, I think what you did once you got to Houston has been almost revolutionary, really. You had a situation where you had a team that was losing, and you had to make a decision. Do we go out and overpay for veteran free agents that might get us to 500, or do we go take our resources and place them elsewhere so that we can build something going forward? I wonder if you can address that for us a little bit.
Sure. First of all, glad to be here, and congrats on 10 years. Really amazing achievement having this conference, and great to be with these figures from other sports that have had so much success. In Houston, I think when Jim Crane bought the team, we inherited a team that had that year the worst record in the major leagues, also had arguably one of the bottom farm systems in baseball. So you really needed to start somewhere. I asked Jim before I took the job, what are my constraints? And we all know when we take these jobs that there's some constraints. This is going to be your coach. This is going to be your assistant.
Sure.
You know, this is what the owner wants to see happen. And what Jim did is he ripped a blank sheet of paper out of his notebook and gave it to me. And that doesn't mean I have unlimited constraints, of course. There's natural constraints based on the economics of our game and our market and all of those things. But what it allowed us to do is really start to think about, okay, we've got a time period here. We want to be good as soon as we can, but we have to do it the right way so that when we get good, we're going to stay good for a while. And what does that mean? It means building up the right infrastructure, hiring the right people, making sure that you have the right scouts, making sure you have the right coaches, starting to bring in the types of players that you're going to be able to develop that's going to get to the big leagues. And at the same time, while you're going through all that, there's all this discussion about tanking. It's never tanking. It's prioritizing where you're going to have the best impact for the organization's future. We still try and win as many games as we possibly can, given the fact that we're pursuing a certain strategy.
Right.
I mean, I had dreams in 2012 that we were going to win a lot of games. It didn't happen. We lost a lot of games. We lost a lot of games again in 2013. But when you think about where your priorities are, you can't be everything to everybody. You can't invest in all the infrastructure and spend your time worrying about scouting and picking a Carlos Correa and all of that. And you know, also dedicate all your resources to marginally trying to improve the club and maybe eke out a few extra wins.
Few extra wins, right.
You also don't give opportunities for your younger players to come up and prove themselves and see if you have something that you can, you know, be part of your future. So I was fortunate in that regard, and we arrived a little ahead of schedule last year, and hopefully we're going to be good for a while. But as we all know, there's as much preparation as you do. Once the games start, it's sort of out of your control. There's injuries, there's luck, there's all the other things that happen.
How important is it, though, to have an owner that gives you a blank piece of paper and says, take your time. I know what your plan is. And you know, 3 years into your plan, you guys are still losing a lot of baseball games. How important is it to have him stick with you? And I think of, of course, the Philadelphia 76ers here. Sam Hinkie had a very specific plan. And now in the middle of this plan, it appears ownership has said, never mind, we're going to change our mind here. And that, to me, is a recipe for disaster.
I think the key part of it is communication with all the stakeholders, and that includes the fans. And we tried in Houston to really be honest with our fans about where we were and where we were going. And we met with season ticket holders. Jim and I basically met with almost every season ticket holder those first couple of years so we could explain what was happening.
I'm only kidding. That was a joke, just a joke.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm kidding, totally kidding. Just kidding.
And you also have to continuously revise your plan. The plan that I presented to Jim in 2011, in December of 2011, is very different than the plan we have today. There's some fundamental aspects of it, but you have to communicate not only with your principal owner, but with all the stakeholders that influence him or her, with your fans and with your organization, your coaches, and your players, quite frankly. And that's probably the largest part of all of our jobs, is that communication element.
So Darryl, you're, I think we all decide, the Emperor of Analytics, we were calling you today before we came on,
Oh.
right? The Emperor of Analytics.
What a title.
Congratulations.
Beats the other nicknames, so that's good. Thanks.
And so, you know, last year the Rocks had a wonderful run, got to the conference finals. I think most people would say that you overachieved. And so everybody's, yes, analytics, they work. Darryl, you know, Darryl's a genius. And then this year, your team has underperformed somewhat. And now analytics is a bust, and Darryl doesn't know what he's doing. So how do you deal with that?
Well, that's just the media.
I don't think it is just the media, honestly.
No, you guys are tricky. You know,
We are
they you know, they're setting Bob up right now. I'm telling you.
I don't claim to have done anything.
Yeah, you know, it's not an interesting story to be like, yeah, a team is very good, very solid. They've won the third most games the last 10 years. They made the Western Conference Finals, and they're pretty good.
Right.
You know, you know, people want to write the story. You know, they're a genius. They made the conference finals. They're ahead.
Hyperbole. That's what we call hyperbole.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously it whipsaws on you, and the truth is always in the middle on all these things. And I think what you want to get to is sustained success. And I think not to give the Patriots, you know, credit. I mean, I think they're they and the Spurs are really the model for how you get to sustained success. I mean, we've had, our owner, Mr. Alexander, he gave me my shot for no reason I thought was rational either. And, he's won 20 out of 22 years. We've had a ton of success, not as much as we want. We haven't had as many titles as we want. But I think the real measure is if you can create sustained success. And I really admire the Pats, the Spurs, and then I really think the Astros are setting themselves up, through the development of their farm system and their long-range planning.
Right.
And I think I've also really admired Golden State. I think it's really hard, and I'd love Nick to chime in, to win a championship and then come back again and still have that success.
Right.
I'll be frank, our team, we had what I would call relative success. We didn't have the success we want, winning the title. And I think starting with myself and through many in the organization, we didn't even handle that relative success well. I think, in training camp, we wanted to make sure we weren't injured, right? That was a big priority. Meanwhile, in training camp, that was sowing a lot of the challenges we've had all year that we've been trying to dig out of, and I think we're moving towards that. So
that's interesting because I think, again, if I was going to ask you, when you look at last year versus this year, there's some change in personnel. There has been some
very little
changes, but very little.
In fact, we brought most of our group. I was trying to learn from Bob. We brought almost everybody back.
Right.
And
so from an analytical standpoint, your philosophy has always been threes, get to the line. That's still happening, but maybe not as like from an analytic standpoint. When you look at last year to this year, what do you see? What do the numbers tell you that has caused you issues?
Well, we're just bad on defense. I mean, that's been the and defense takes the right players, the right system, the right commitment, and across all three of those, players playing worse, system, not as good as we want, and everyone playing, always together. Like all three of those things have really not been as good. And, the league's playing faster, so your transition defense becomes even bigger in the NBA every single year. And that's something we're constantly on, but that's another one that fell backwards. So, we were top 10 defense last year, and we've taken a huge tumble. And that's the number one thing, to be frank.
Nick, can you speak to the consistency of coming
Well,
back?
sure. I was going to talk about, there's all of us in all of our sports do a lot of statistics, a lot of information. This correlates to winning, this correlates to losing, whatever the case may be. You've talked a little bit about defense. In football, there's a lot of variables that are involved on the football field, just in terms of there's 22 players on each play, you're dealing with conditions, what's the win. There's so many different things that are involved. But the one statistic from our perspective that's held true, I think since 2007, we've won 90+% of our games when we have no turnovers. So everybody talks about turnover margin,
Right.
Sometimes you're +2, +3. Well, in our particular case, it's a matter of not turning the ball over. So when we have no turnovers, that gives us a chance to before you can win, you have to keep from losing. We talk about that a lot within our building. And one of those metrics is not turning the ball over. So that's something you have to develop, just in terms of practice, drill, and understand the mindset as a team of what we're trying to do. So there's so much statistics, so much information that's out there. But for us, what we found, if we don't turn the ball over, we're going to have a 90% chance of winning, and it's held true. Even if you look at some of the games this year in our particular season. So the playoff game against Kansas City, we didn't turn the ball over, and it being a one-possession game, we ended up winning by a touchdown. We go out to Denver, we turn the ball over multiple times, and it ends up being a one-possession game, but in the end, it was just too much to overcome because we turned the ball over.
So let me ask you this, in terms of turnovers, and I was in Denver, so those turnovers were caused, it wasn't a running back fumbling, so we can't blame Stephen Ridley this time. So, I happen to like Stephen Ridley, a very good running back, but there were problems at the line, so there's problem protecting Brady, so those fumbles are different. So how do you measure, a fumble, there's just, I don't know, probably 30 different ways to fumble a football.
Yeah, turnovers are really a team statistic. It starts with really the simplest thing, going back to junior high school, taking a snap from center. So getting the snap, center exchange, it's throwing, it's catching, it's running, it's securing the football, and taking care of the ball. And you have to really develop a mindset as a team, and that starts really, you talk about, kind of turning the page from one season to the next. really we're starting from square one, like once the season is over. I think what we've been able to do through the years is kind of turn the page on what happened the previous season and focus on the things that we can control, which are improving and getting better as a team. So things as simple as fundamentals and ball security are drilled in the spring, in April and May, and then you carry that over to training camp. And then when you start to see that translate onto the field and you have some success, the players start to buy in and understand that, look, we take care of the ball, we're going to have a chance to win every week.
How do you draft someone not to fumble? Is that possible?
It is, which, that's one of the things we definitely look at when we go through and look at ball handlers and specifically, running backs. I mean, you can chart that. You can chart fumbles and then a number lost, and there's definitely a correlation between players that
Even in the college level? I mean, I'm wondering, like, the translation from college to pro. Maybe
there is. I mean, you can try to coach it and correct it and fix it, but, we've had examples of players who they had fumbling problems in college, and then they had fumbling problems in the NFL. So unless you figure out a way to coach that and correct that, then it's probably going to continue. But it's something we can actually study. Like if I want to pull, a running back from whatever school, Stanford, like Tristan McCaffrey, just to pick a name, everybody kind of knows him. Okay, if you want to see all his touches, and then you can drill down even more and say, okay, how many times was the ball lost? Okay, not necessarily fumble, but you can actually pull those plays up and see, is it something that, okay, is it open field? Is the ball away from his body? Is it in the framework? Is it just, whatever?
A bad handoff or someone
exactly.
not protecting him.
And then you can decide, okay, we have a ball security problem, or it's not a problem. It's just, the defender made a good hit on the ball. So, I mean, there's different things that you have to look at, but that's where you kind of look at the video from our perspective, merge that with the data, and then try to fuse together your overall opinion of what you think you have in the player.
Right. It's interesting, Daryl, when you talk about the challenge of coming back from a successful season, and we haven't experienced anything like what the Patriots have or the Spurs, but I think I would answer that, and I don't know, Nick, if you can add to it. I don't know Tom Brady at all, but I imagine he is never satisfied with, he could have 10 championships and he wants another one. And if your best player shows up at work with that mindset, everybody gets in line. If Steph Curry, who won a championship, does the same thing this year that he did last year and acts the same way this year that he did last year, you better believe everybody else is going to get in line. So if you're fortunate enough to have a guy like that, or your coach, Bill Belichick, again, I don't know him, 50 championships wouldn't be enough. He wants 51. That's just who he is. So if Steve Kerr, who's won 5 as a player, Steve Kerr came back the exact same guy, although he was sick. His personality, nobody walked around and acted as if they'd really done anything short of their job. The hard part for us in management, I think, there's an analytics component, absolutely. There's a people component. Finding people, one, that when adversity strikes, and it does every season, it all comes. People say our season has been minus any adversity. Well, we didn't have our head coach for 40 games. That's pretty. Take Bill Belichick out for 8 games. See what happens.
You've had 6 moments of adversity. It's been tough.
Harrison sprained his ankle.
We're feeling for you. Yeah.
But in any event, no. Well, my point is this, that if your leaders in your organization, just like your job, the people that you are underneath or the people that you report to, if your leaders exemplify a certain work ethic, personality, I just watch Tom Brady on TV on the sidelines, and I feel like I got to do my job better, the way he's yelling at everybody. Talk about fumbling the ball. I don't know what analytics add to or tell you about fumbling, but I bet the first day of training camp, Tom Brady takes something from snap, and if it's a rookie center and he doesn't snap it right, Tom Brady immediately is saying to that guy, that's not going to work.
It's actually a little more colorful than that.
Or whatever, yeah, right. You can say it. But, so there's 2 parts, right?
Sure.
There's the analytic. There may be a guy that fumbled in college because he wasn't even focused or he's so talented, and then Tom Brady gets a hold of him, or they may be a rookie that we draft and he sees Steph Curry after practice every single day working on his shot, and he's the best shooter in the world. What's that person going to think when he goes, maybe I should go work on, I'm not even a good shooter, and that guy's doing it.
Right.
And so there are analytics, and it goes into the development, but I think we all are working hard to add. Steph Curry's coach said the best thing about analytics when I saw him when we were in North Carolina, and probably people have heard it, but Bob McKillop said, analytics are like a bikini. They show a lot, that they don't show you everything. And so I thought that was hilarious.
That's pretty good.
But
Tweet that.
yeah, right.
But so
I stole it from him. It's not mine.
But so let me ask you about, let's just talk a little bit about analytics with Golden State. My colleague, I don't know if he's here, Ethan Sherwood-Strauss, if he's here, does a great job covering your team. And one of the things that he said, one of his stories I thought was really interesting was that you had your analytics guy come down and rebound for Steph Curry. See, I thought that was brilliant because it seems to me that the disconnect that we've talked quite a bit about here over the last 2 days, there are ways to, break down those barriers, and that seems to me maybe to be a little one.
Huge
Of course, the media wrote a story about poor John Hollinger. He came down and rebounded, and it was a major affront to the team. So
Well, that's probably because he
can't
couldn't
speak
grab
to
the ball properly. I'm just saying.
that's
Yeah, our
probably
analytics gets a great rebound. No, you know what, Jackie? I think to answer that question best is another area. We talk about communication in relationships and talk about with your spouse, your kids, but in an organization, for example, let's say I have something our analytics guy gave to me that's important. Is it appropriate for me to approach Steve Kerr with that right after we lost a game in overtime and say, hey, Steve, I don't know what we were doing out there. We didn't shoot enough.
If you had hedged on the weak
hedged, or take, for example, we have no equity in our relationship. I've never went to dinner with him. I don't know who his kids are. I don't know who his wife is. And I'm going to take the moments that are the most difficult in our organization where he's feeling the most vulnerable and hit him with some analytics thing. So you got to be careful of how you communicate it. And that's where organizational alignment comes in. I imagine, and I don't know you guys, and I can't speak to any other organization, but if from ownership, GM, coaches, players, if there's an alignment, analytics are wonderful, right? They're fantastic because they're a great tool to help you win. That's what we're trying to win. Right. So analytics can help you win when used properly. But if you don't communicate that information properly, it never gets there. It's like a parent that was never there for their kid, and all of a sudden you want to start parenting. You have to build a relationship so you know that when I go to Steve Kerr, let's talk about this in a very kind of innocuous, safe place. Here's some information. We think it might help you. And to know that he can hear it, and he doesn't feel like I'm picking on the coaching, or he doesn't feel like I'm upset with the way they're doing things. It's just a conversation, right? And I think that's where we have to start, because the numbers are there. We all have a ton of analytics. I mean, we have a ton of stuff. And we can get into the wearables and all those things, which I think is fascinating. But as far as implementation, I think the area that we need the most work in is communication. And that's relational to me, as far as like building that trust. Bill Belichick knows he's not getting fired, so any analytics you give, he can use them, but he's not afraid of them. And so I think the foundation is really in that area. At least that's my opinion of it.
So Jeff, I want to talk to you a little bit about, because you've brought in some very interesting people into your group, a former NASA scientist, which I guess has been a panelist here. Is that correct?
Yeah, SIG.
So I wish I had met him. And but I think there's a lot of an economist too. I believe economics makes sense to me with analytics and sports. But can you speak to some of these people and how they relate to your front office and how they help your team?
Sure, and I think the topic you're bringing up is really, when we talk about the future of the front office, it's how do you have that alignment from top to bottom, and how do you create the change that you're trying to create, which may have nothing to do with analytics, it may be something else, but that's probably what's going to separate those that have success from those that don't. The other thing that's starting to develop in front offices, I'm sure in your sports as well, is diversified backgrounds, diversified people in the front offices. I've got MBAs, I've got PhDs, I've got people that never went to college. I've got a whole spectrum of different backgrounds. The common thread is that we all have a passion for baseball. We all share the same goal, and we all want to get better. We've tried the model of sending the person with the information out to the field to teach the coaches. That model doesn't work. The coaches have to, first of all, understand the information in order to transfer it to the players. How you get the coaches on board is a critical success factor, especially in baseball, where we have 8 teams before you get to the major leagues. So we're talking about 8 coaches, 8 managers, 8 hitting coaches, pitching coaches, rovers, et cetera. You've got to get all those people aligned. And if you have a couple of people in the chain that are working at cross purposes, it destroys everything, because the player will suddenly get mixed messages and so forth. So I think that's been a big part of it. I think the other challenge that we're going to face going forward is we're all building these capabilities, we're all hiring these smart people, these capable people, and then they're getting picked off by other clubs. And we're seeing that you develop your proprietary knowledge base and ways of doing
sure.
things.
And they, wow.
It's not like other industries. We're a zero-sum game. Any advantage I have comes at the disadvantage of the Rangers.
No trademarks, right?
So we protect information and secrets vigorously. And there's so much turnover, not only among players who go to another team and say, hey, the Astros did it this way, and then that sparks ideas, but also coaches go from organization to organization, front office people, and it really becomes a fine balance between sharing information that has to be shared for them to really understand it and create the change you want, and protecting yourself, because once the change gets out and it's across the industry, you're all starting at zero again.
Right,
your advantage is
you gotta
gone.
find something new.
It could be a year, it could be 2 years, it could be 5 years, but once it's gone, you got to work on the next thing.
So toss me a nugget on the NASA scientist. Toss me a nugget from something about
Well,
him.
he did sleep research for NASA, and sleep is one of the things I'm sure we're all dealing with.
No
bet,
question.
you
Since
bet.
since we went into the American League, we have to fly to the West Coast all the time, and it's our athletes, they play games at night, then they eat a big meal after the game, and then they go out, and then it's just the schedule is really difficult, the amount of travel and the conditions. I mean, I'm sure no one feels sorry for them staying in 4- and 5-star hotels and all of that, but it is that's a big area. So SIG has been big on sleep. We've hired a lot of different people as consultants to try and help us on sleep, and we haven't gone so far as having one of those planes that I think there's some teams that do, where they have all beds in the planes and stuff like
Might
that.
have the sleep pods or
Right,
the sleep
right.
tanks, sure.
But that's coming. Those days are coming, because rest and recovery is a big part of all this. Wearable stuff's going to be great, but you're going to need to know what to do with it, and I think rest and recovery is going to be a big part. So that's the nugget on SIG. Okay. SIG also has a document that he sent to me in 2003 that I read, and I met him at the winter meetings, and that document has a DeLorean on the cover. It talks about the future of baseball and analytics, and it's in the National Baseball Hall of Fame.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's pretty impressive.
In the basement, but still.
Not displayed.
So Daryl, I'm sure you have a sleep specialist in your group too, right?
Yeah, we've worked a lot on sleep. Actually, the
Shoot-arounds, right? People are changing when they do their shoot-arounds.
they shifted those. There's a lot of because it's not actually 100% clear on what to do with shoot-arounds. Like that one hasn't, at least for us, been a big change. But the big changes, some of them are as usual. The best ones are simple. The schedule makers have helped, not helped Bob, I heard, but they've helped most teams. The 4 and 5s are down, the back-to-backs are down.
Right.
But even simple things like just staying overnight rather than flying out after the game when you're allowed to. That's been a big change. I know a lot of teams have adopted. That's been a positive. I think, so that it's for sure, it's demonstrably a huge factor. I mean, you can measure it 100 different ways, how impaired you become with less sleep. And
So how about rest? So your team, it's an interesting thing because you're the defending champions and everybody's gunning for you every night. We know historically what that's like, and yet you have been beating teams so soundly that very often some of your starters, a good number of them, get to sit out the entire fourth quarter. If that were not happening, would you be looking at resting some of your star players, in anticipation of a long playoff run?
Well, where's my guy Vinny? Where's he? He
He's
leave?
there. There
All
he
right.
is.
He made a good point in the last. All the coaches did,
Vinny
guys.
Del Negro,
Not just
yeah.
it wasn't just Vinny, but talked about depth. We are so star crazy sometimes to our own detriment in front offices, and I think the depth, because you have to remind yourself that in the playoffs you do play. Your rotation shrinks, which is it should, and you deal with that because every one of those games matters as much as anything can matter. So you're not playing 10 guys usually.
Right.
Sometimes you can, but usually you see guys creeping up to 38, 39, 40 minutes. The depth issue, to me, protects your players from injury through the course of the season because it's just common knowledge that if a player's playing 28, 29 minutes, forget about what his body looks like or what SportsView says, he has a less chance of getting hurt than if he plays 38, 39. So for us, we're fortunate that we've been able to, fortunately, draft well, where we have the ability to add veterans around some of our young guys. But it's going to be harder because we're not going to get players. We probably won't get guys in the second round like Draymond Green, so we can have cheap guys and build veterans around them. So for us, and Steve's done a tremendous job being a former player, being a former player that played into June, understanding the rhythms of a player, understanding what's at stake. A lot of coaches, because every day they're on the line. I mean, coaches are scrutinized at such a high degree now. Every game they answer to the media. 3 times a day they speak to the media. They're competitive. They want to win. So it's very hard for a coach in the heat of battle to sit a player unless he feels like he's got a bench that can support it and help him win games. So you can better believe if a coach in the course of a game is thinking macro enough to say, you know what, we're going to probably lose this game if my star sits, but I'm going to sit him anyway. And take that heat after the game when his GM walks in there and says, what was going on with that?
Sure.
And he says, well, I'm trying to think about
Okay,
the
but you're the
playoff.
GM. Would you do that?
No, I wouldn't.
Okay.
I wouldn't, because first of all, I'm fortunate to have the coach that we have where he does see a picture and he's played the game. I didn't play in the NBA. I don't know what it's like to be an NBA player. Who am I to trump what he says about our ultimate goal of winning a championship and how we should play minutes? I think I'd be way out of line in asking Steve Kerr that. But if I did, and I felt that, which I wouldn't, I'd have the conversation. But at the same time, you have to, I don't want to coach the team, right? Well, GMs, I don't know if you, I don't want to coach our, I can't
coach.
Okay, maybe you want to coach. I don't want to, I'm not good enough. But I don't want them to walk in after the draft and say, what were you doing? You're an idiot. Why'd you pick that guy? That's the same thing as us walking in their room and saying, what were you thinking? Now, there's an appropriate time and place to have a congenial conversation. But for us, I know I'm spiraling, the depth thing.
I like it. Keep going.
Yeah, the depth thing adds to our ability to hopefully stay healthy and rest players, because when you take Steph Curry out, you feel good about Sean Livingston being in the game, or you feel good about Andre Iguodala being in the game. It's hard to find, right? But I was thinking about it when the coaches were speaking on the last. The coaches want to do it too, but at what cost, right? I think somebody said, well, who am I going to put in the game if I take out that guy?
Right.
They want to feel good about who's coming in the game. They want to rest players. I don't think coaches want to burn players out. So the hard part is, if you look at the past NBA champions over the last however many years, or I don't know, NFL, and you can talk about base, depth, whether it's depth in pitching, depth in linebacker core, I don't know. It's hard to find a championship team in the NBA that was really thin. Even the great Celtics, they had bench players that were good. The Spurs, great bench players.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the last NBA team that won that had a real short bench, and maybe you know better than I do, but a team that, I mean, even those Lakers
you're the
teams
basketball expert. I'm sure you can.
Yeah, I mean, Odom, those Lakers
What
teams.
they're really saying is, Jackie, you're old as dirt.
But you understand my
Yeah, I
point.
do.
I mean, we all talk about, give me 3 stars. I mean, I guess the Heat, but, you know, was Ray Allen. I mean, they had Ray Allen coming out, and they had guys, Shane Battier.
You're talking 7 or 8, though, and you guys can go.
Yeah, but
you
to
guys can go
have
9
8
or 10.
really good players is really hard. Just to have 8. Dallas was, but yeah, Sean Marion, Terry. I mean, those guys were they starters? I don't know, but that was a deep team. Is what you're saying. You're saying that wasn't deep?
You're saying the opposite of that.
I have to think
See,
about
Warren
it.
Laguerre is even older than dirt.
But it's
so.
rare. It's rare. It's
Love you,
rare
Warren.
because to win a championship, you have to be healthy.
Right.
And to be healthy, to get through a regular season without injury probably means you have to have some depth. So I think they're kind of correlated in that way.
Which football is, it's really unique from our perspective because we play once a week. So
Right.
the goal
Very
is
different,
to have the player be at his optimum level on Sunday. So you kind of have to structure and cater the week a little bit differently, how you practice. Okay, do we practice in pads this day? Okay, well, maybe we need an extra day. Maybe it's a lighter practice. And along the same lines, if you have a player who's injured and maybe he's close to returning, okay, does it make more sense to rush the player back and try to get him to play in that next game if you're in week 10 or 11, or resting him an extra week or two, maybe that'll make him a little more healthy and preserve him for later on in the season. So we only play once a week. So there's a constant ebb and flow of communication between the player, between the coach, between our strength staff. You talk about, it's really about health and wellness of your players. And you can measure it certain ways, but there's also communication back and forth. And we talk about communication top to bottom between the position coach, the head coach, the coordinator, the strength coach, a nutritionist, and figure out, okay, what's the plan for this player? The trainers, they're involved. So there's a constant flow of communication, and then we try to build up the week so that on Sunday, the player goes out there and he can perform at his optimum level. But we play once a week, so we're trying to maximize that one opportunity, and it's 60 minutes.
And you were dealing with that all season long because you had one player after another go down. And in covering your team, I often wondered, are they saving Edelman? Are they trying to buy Edelman one more week? And I wonder if it varies with each player, again, based on some of the scientific data you have from your medical specialists on your team.
It absolutely varies from player to player. One sprained ankle or one ankle injury or one foot injury with one player might be different relative to another player. So we have some devices and things we can use, and we can test the individual players and see if there's an imbalance or there's a weakness of one leg relative to the other. But the health of your players is the most important thing. And it's really, you have to be smart about the player. And like I said, they have to listen to their body, and they have to let us know how they feel.
Right.
And
which sometimes they don't do.
Sure. But look, you want to win games, but you're not going to sacrifice a player's well-being and health just to rush them back on the field, because that's the wrong thing to do. Because then you lose the trust of the players, and that's not what you're trying to do. So you have to be smart. And look, that's why you have 53 players on your team. You have 10 players in your practice squad in our particular case. So okay. You take 46 to the game, so you know you're going to have 7 players that are inactive each week. Okay, if we have to bring a player up from the practice squad, which we've done a lot of through the years, Darius Fleming, I mean, you know, players like Josh Klein, who started 13 games or whatever it was at guard for us, started on our practice squad. So you have to manage your roster, and it's really a week-to-week sort of proposition. And then each day we meet as a staff and say, okay, this player's going to practice, he's not going to practice, he's probably not going to be ready for the game. So then you can start your preparations early enough in the week and get other players ready. So you're trying to balance off a number of things.
I want to make kind of a quick point related to Bob's and the alignment that you want. And that's, I want my head coach to come to me right after I pick a player and say, or before preferably, and say, why are you picking that guy? And only one coach has done that, Coach Van Gundy, early in my career. I mean, he challenges everything, which is great. I loved it.
I more bet you it's him saying you shouldn't have picked that guy.
Yeah, well, he actually mostly didn't care who we picked. He was mostly intellectually curious because he wasn't going to play him anyway. Yeah. So he actually had a name for him. He called him after the fact. He was like, the next guy will be coaching who you pick now. But he said, like, you're taking this guy. I get if you're taking a guy and he's got tons of talent, he's long, put a lot of time. But I've been in this league a long time. He said, you're taking that guy and a bunch of guys that, yeah, if they pan out, like, whatever, you can just go get a guy in Europe or out of the minor leagues. Like, why am I spending all this time developing this guy? And it was actually a reasonable point.
Yeah, and that's the same thing if you were to walk down after a game and say to him, respectfully, I'm wondering why we did this. As long as you can have those conversations.
He was good about that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm not saying he wasn't at all.
But a lot of times it doesn't come out like that.
So we were talking backstage, Daryl, about numbers and how sometimes numbers are misleading. No. You don't remember that? Oh,
no, I'm kidding.
He has amnesia from here to here.
I was saying numbers never misleading.
Okay, well, so Rajon Rondo, who everybody in Boston here is familiar with, has had a ton of triple doubles this year. So a lot of fans come up to me and say, Rondo's back. He's having an incredible year. And then you go and you look at the ESPN's Real Plus Minus, which I know is probably rudimentary compared to what you guys are doing, but I think it's a fairly decent indicator. And, you know, Rondo's 20th among point guards in Real Plus Minus because his defensive numbers in particular aren't very good, and he's never been an offensive player. So I wonder if you can each one, because we're almost down to the Q&A, give me an example of a player whose statistics didn't tell the whole story and why he might have been more valuable or less valuable than his numbers tell us, his raw numbers.
Well, I mean, Shane Battier was the most.
Yes,
they wrote a whole article on it. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we got him when we had Yao Ming and Tracy McGrady because we thought he was perfect next to Tracy, who actually, full circle, Bob represented Tracy when he was with the Rockets. So we thought Shane could perfectly handle the defensive assignments and be a great entry passer and shooter. So we knew his impact was much bigger than his 8 points and 6 rebounds or whatever he averaged in his career.
Jeff, I think
I wouldn't say, I mean, our projections are wrong all the time on individual players. As an entire group compared to third-party projections or probably what other clubs have, we do a nice job. But it's a very inexact science. I think, trying to project player performance started years ago with scouts looking at tools and skills and trying to figure out which skills are going to transfer well to our environment. And then all of a sudden, we spent a lot more focus on what they've actually done as a predictor of what they're going to do in the future. And now we're kind of back to measuring those skills again because we have a whole new way of measuring those skills besides scouts' eyes that didn't exist before. And every time we go into one of these new eras, we look back and say, wow, that was not a very good predictive model. We made a lot of mistakes in there. Hopefully this one is going to be more predictive. And I do think the new models that are going to be coming out in the next 5+ years in baseball are going to be way more predictive than the very good models that have existed for the past 5 to 10 years. But there's mistakes. I mean, we all make mistakes. Hopefully we make a few less mistakes than the next guy so we get to keep our jobs. But
Colin McHugh, pretty good hit for you, though. That was a pretty good one for you.
That was a good one, but that was partially luck, too.
Okay.
There's a lot of luck in our decisions, just like there are in the players' decisions.
So, Nick, I want to ask you about Malcolm Butler.
Sure, yeah, no,
we
definitely,
talked about
Jackie.
that before. So Malcolm went to the Combine and actually went to the
He didn't go to the Combine.
Alabama Pro Day.
Right. So
and he went to the
was-
junior varsity Alabama
Exactly.
Pro
So,
Day. Yeah.
so there's 300 or so players that are invited to this Indianapolis Scouting Combine each year, and then there's some players that aren't invited to the Combine. We have had a number of players, Julian Edelman, Sebastian Bulmer, who didn't go to the Combine, who ended up being decent players for us. But in Malcolm's case, so he played at West Alabama, which I'm sure nobody knows where that is. I don't even know where it is. I couldn't tell you. And he went to the University of Alabama, their pro day, and he worked out there, and he didn't run very well relative to the position that he played, defensive back. I think he ran 4.6 or high 4.5s, and everybody's so focused on time, speed, and how fast they run at the Combine. This guy ran 4.3, this guy ran 4.4, but the reality is, in football, the amount of times that a player runs from point A to point B without having to move or there's an object in his face, it rarely happens. So in Malcolm's case, he ran poorly. But he was a productive player at West Alabama, even though the level of competition was minimal. So we actually brought him in as a rookie mini camp tryout, which means he wasn't even on the team. Like there was literally no commitment on our end. But we thought there were some things, and we had one of our scouts had earmarked him, so we brought him in, and it was literally a rookie tryout, a 2-day tryout, and he looked halfway decent in that particular case, and we ended up signing him. So then we're in spring camps, and he continues to show up and make plays on the football, like continuously. I think he had a pass breakup literally every day in practice. And even Tom said something like, who is this guy? And, I mean, nobody knew who he was. So, I mean, look, in that particular case, you had a player who wasn't well known, didn't test very well, so there's a lot of reliance on the information from his testing numbers. But, we took a chance, and it's not about necessarily great scouting. Sometimes you're going to fall into some players. But then when the player enters your building and your program, it's about, does he have the requisite traits that it takes to be successful in your building? Is he coachable? Does he improve? Does he work hard? And if he does those things and he takes coaching, there's a chance that he's going to improve. And to Malcolm's credit, he really was the fourth corner in 2014.
Right.
Everybody knows about the play in the Super Bowl, but then this year he was, our best corner, and he ended up going to the Pro Bowl. So a lot of that is about Malcolm. It's not necessarily about what we do or scouting or anything like that. But I mean, we could probably, all of us have examples exactly like that.
So somebody that analytically is
well, Draymond Green seems to me to be your Grand Slam home run.
He's actually analytically fantastic.
Right.
He fills the box score all over the place. One guy that's interesting that if you looked at, I don't even know what his numbers are this year, but Iguodala, I don't even know how somebody called him the other day on our team the adult in the room. And there's no number for, you're in the huddle, things aren't going well, you're on the road, turn the ball over, you're tired. There's no number for the guy in the huddle that sits there and they all look at and he says, we're good, we're fine, calm down. That's Andre Iguodala. Doesn't mean he made 5 shots or
right, sure.
That you can't. His numbers are not great this year statistically, but when he's there and he's on the court, there's a calmness about our team. When he's in the locker room, I remember last year, as we were, I didn't know what we would be like trying to win a championship, but I do know that Iguodala, just watching him interviewed and watching his presence, I thought this is somebody that's acting like they've been here before, even though they haven't. Mm-hmm. And he is probably the guy that's most respect. Draymond's fantastic, but he's all exuberance and everything. Andre's the one that kind of is able to identify with everybody on the team. And I don't know how numbers show that. But I do know that it's real and it's there. And obviously in the championships, he won the MVP and deserved it all. But there's people that add value just by being who they are on a team that I can't really quantify numerically. I guess you can in real plus minus stuff like that when they're on the floor.
And
but
he's pretty decent.
Yeah, and he's
real
good at that.
minus.
But your own individual statistics as far as 10 points, 5 rebounds, none of that stuff correlates much with him.
All right, so let's take some questions because we're, okay. What job or function do you see in the front office 5 years from now that is not there now? Come on, you guys can arm wrestle for this. Let's go.
I want Jeff to answer.
Probably something around the psychology. I mean, all that chemistry stuff that we talked about,
Right.
we're all trying to measure it. We have no idea how to do it. I think we're going to probably get better at it because everybody recognizes how important it is. And what is it about players that succeed versus those that don't? I mean, we all have some sort of team doctor that deals with the mental side of the game, but I think that's going to become a more important component.
Okay.
I would just say, generally speaking, the whole health and wellness area, that's probably the area that you're going to see the biggest surge or growth.
The wearables and
The
such.
wearables,
Yep.
the sleep, the psychology. It's really about, it all falls under one umbrella, and it relates to player performance and player wellness. So those are areas I think that people are starting to tap into more and more.
All right, if your best player, we'll do this to you. If your best player doesn't exemplify that, your work ethic, how do you instill it in the rest of the team? Is it possible?
Why are we saying about my guy?
Because you have a guy that's going to be the MVP again
So you're
this year.
saying if he doesn't exemplify, the question was if he doesn't exemplify a good
Right,
work
it's
ethic?
hypothetical. We know
Right,
that Steph
okay,
does.
So if someone on your team doesn't exemplify, then you got to trade that guy.
Okay.
If your best
that's
player
fair.
is
even bring
not
him
a
into
hard
your
worker. Well, yeah, I mean, if your best,
Good
if the
answer.
most important person in your organization, player-wise, doesn't work hard, well, let's
Yeah, but
try someone else.
That is the right question. It's like compared to what? So like, let's say you didn't get Golden State, you got to take over, pick another team that didn't have Steph Curry,
Right, sure. So,
and you don't have a best player, right? That like, what do you
well,
what's
if your best player on your team isn't, then I guess you'd try to bring in somebody that is better, that is
yeah,
a
but
hard
there
worker.
aren't 30 of them.
Right, so you're saying if your best player
it's
on your
compared
team
to what?
isn't hardworking, then, yeah, look, you can
Then
deal
you're
with
the
it front
Sacramento
on.
Kings.
Well, but I think you can. I didn't say that.
I did.
But I think that if you are faced with that, you try to deal with it front on, and if you can, then you have no choice, right? What's your choice?
Well, it's just
You
that,
try to
like-
get back good
like
value.
You were talking about depth. I don't want to call you out, but it's again compared to what? But yeah, depth is great in concept, but like, do you spend money on depth to the detriment of having money to go get Andre Iguodala or to go to get, you went out and spent on Iguodala is the best example. You spent a lot of money on him. So
Yeah, we spent probably market value on him.
no, I understand,
Yeah.
but it was
No, but I guess the question is,
no. My point
we
is
paid
like
$12 million for.
you could have
was it
done
6
that,
million?
or you could have gotten 3 better guys, 8, 9, 10 for $5 million each.
Right.
Well, why didn't you do that?
Why didn't we do that? Well, we
'Cause you
didn't
could have
to,
better
'cause
depth, Bob.
We had cheap guys that we drafted, which
Right,
allowed
because
us
you
to
draft
go.
amazingly, yes. Yeah,
I'm not saying any of these things for the record, okay? But anyways, I don't know. Go ahead, move on. Unless you want me to try to answer that.
All right, so we'll give this one to Daryl. All right, how's that?
Bob,
Daryl,
you could grill me now. Sorry.
Yeah.
This is why it's fun.
quid pro quo. Given the upcoming NBA salary cap explosion, which we know is going to happen, and the low supply of true max players, how do you avoid signing bad contracts or overpaying?
Was that David Falk?
I don't think so. But you know that Evan Turner is going to get a lot of money.
I can't address that. Just to paint the picture of what's happening, I think it's unprecedented across every sport.
No question.
We have like the most money ever coming into the system, and there are a lot of very sophisticated NBA teams, hopefully we're one, who planned ahead for this summer to avoid this huge amount of money. So we have the most money ever coming into the system chasing the fewest players
right.
almost ever. So that's going to affect things, yeah. It's a good
It's not
year.
even an answer.
It's really not.
No, it's a good year.
About my answer, I had a real answer.
It's a good year to sit out, I would
I
say.
think he said he's ready for it. That's what I heard.
Yeah. No, you probably, it's going to be hard to have a good free agent. If you're chasing the obvious top guys, you'll be fine.
So
But
you have Dwight Howard, and Dwight Howard's going to be a free agent.
okay. You can talk about that. I'm like, what are you going to ask me now?
I'm going to ask you, how do you avoid overpaying for Dwight Howard? Let me rephrase it that way.
Well, luckily, so the commissioner's office has created this max salary thing, so that helps us all.
So you're committing to a max salary to.
I like this is good.
I didn't say that.
Continue here.
I just said they have that concept. So, yeah.
Okay, perhaps we'll move on now. Let me ask Jeff this question. How does this is a little different baseball, but still, how does the acceptable timeline for development of individual players in your respective sports alter the planning for the future? So putting a timeline on talent, which I think is a hard thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's very different than these other two sports here because we're investing millions of dollars into 16-year-old Dominican, Venezuelan, Cuban kids, and we got no chance of them helping our big league club for at least 4 years in an absolute A+ scenario. More than likely they'll never help our club.
Or maybe even 6 or 8
But if they
years.
do, it's going to be 6 years, 8 years. And even a good college player that you draft is a junior in college, you're looking at least probably 2 years. So for us, the development side of the equation is critical. We have to spend so much time and energy on that development side, even knowing that the return is going to be a ways away. Very different from what these guys deal with.
Just along the lines of that same question, there's really no timetable in terms of development. Every player sort of develops at a different rate. Some develops quicker than others, but typically, you know, the way your schedule is structured, when a player comes in, let's say we draft a player in May, comes into our building in May. Okay, it's the first time we have him. So he goes through kind of spring camp, he goes through training camp, he goes through the full season, then he goes through an off-season program, then he goes through another training camp. By that time, you should have a pretty good idea of what you have in that player. Now, does that necessarily translate over into performance on the field? It may or may not relative to the competition in front of them. But, you know, it's every player is going to develop at a different rate, and you can't necessarily say, okay, after, you know, 3 years. I mean, you need to know, you'll know sooner rather than later, and if you can earmark those players ahead of time, talking about long-term planning, like this is a player you might want to move forward with, you know, in the future.
So let me ask you, you've had a series of young receivers that have come through the Patriots, and Tom Brady is a very specific, demanding quarterback. We know that. We also know that your offense is very, very complex, and I think it takes some time for young receivers probably to catch on. Is there a general timetable for, say, a position player like that, where you need to see not necessarily results on the field, but an understanding of what you're trying to run, and can they grasp that concept?
Sure, I think that's probably one position, college football now, that the things that a receiver specifically is going to be, and I would say most skill positions offensively, what they're going to be asked to do when they come into our league are so drastically different than what they did in college. I mean, you realistically have some colleges and programs, they run literally 5 plays. I mean, that's all they do. And so how the college game, that kind of impacts maybe, you know, the player evaluation. So you have to really drill down and spend more time. You know, we have a process and a structure that we use where we kind of, when we bring the players in, kind of put them through a whatever receiver school, position school, and you try to test that as much you can ahead of time to see, you know, does he have the capacity to learn? You know, how quickly he's going to make progress? So it's just when you have young players, you know, and our players are a little further developed than, you know, high school players. You know, you have basketball players and baseball players that can come from right from high school to their respective leagues. Our players have typically gone through at least 2 to 3 years of college football, but even that, I mean, they're making such a big jump, even though they have experience. So, you know, there's a patience level, and it's just a matter of how quickly the player is going to adapt and respond, and that's where the coaching part of it comes in.
Sure.
You know, like Steve Neal's a perfect example. A guy never played, literally.
Former wrestler.
Right, former wrestler, never played football. And we're fortunate to have, I mean, in my opinion, one of the best offensive line coaches and probably in the sport, Dante Scarnecchia, and he basically took Steve Neal.
Glad he's back, Nick.
Little favoritism here on the panel.
Oh, get over it. Get over it. You had your time. Come on. You want a ring. What do you want from us, okay?
It's not all Boston.
But
Okay.
that's probably enough.
All right. And so to finish out the panel, we'll let Bob Myers say whatever he would like for the final 14 seconds.
Daryl and I are going to have a debate on what network do you want to have a debate on next week? Yeah.
Six.
Our own
Crossfire?
debate. Yeah, Crossfire.
Gotcha.
We can have Warren moderate.
Are we invited?
All right. Thanks,
you guys.
everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, did you?